Okay.
We are live. Go, Ingrid.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ingrid Collins, and I'm the Associate State Director for Community Engagement with AARP Florida. Welcome to our webinar today. We're so glad that you could join us for this important topic. A few housekeeping notes for our attendees. Please note that this webinar is being recorded. Attendee lines are muted just so that we can minimize background noise. However, we do want to hear from you. So if you have any questions, feel free at any time to use your comments section, whether you're on Facebook or joining us on YouTube. Use that comment section to submit any questions at any time. We will have a short break between presenters if anybody wishes to ask their question live. And so just as a reminder, we're here today honoring World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. This year, 2020, marks its 14th anniversary. And we all know that every year, abuse and exploitation of older Americans comes into the tune of about $3 billion, and that's only the amount that is reported. We know that for the 40 million family caregivers that are out there, this is important. And particularly when you have to pay someone else to help you and to provide aid to your loved one. It is just a very important topic. So again, we're glad that you're here with us. And for those of you who are seeking continuing education units, I'm going to switch over now to Wendy McCarty, who's going to just give you the reminders about the logistics. Wendy, take it away.
Hi, all. This is Wendy from University Behavioral Center. We are honored to be able to provide your CEUs today. Please make sure you complete the survey after the presentations today. That information will be relayed to us, and we'll make sure that we enter everyone's CEUs in CE Broker. If you have any questions, my email address is on the screen. And again, I'm with University Behavioral Center. We're a hospital here in Orlando. We provide detox, substance use rehab, as well as mental health care for children and adults. Feel free to call us anytime. We are open 365 days a year, 24/7. And thank you for having us today.
Thank you so much, Wendy. So without further ado, let's go on to our first speaker. Sajid Hafeed is a psychiatrist who serves as medical director of the Acute Care Baker Act unit at the University Behavioral Center. Dr. Hafeed has also served as UBC's medical director of the former long-term adolescent residential units. In addition, Dr. Hafeed serves as assistant professor of psychiatry at the University of Central Florida. Thank you, Dr. Hafeed. He's going to speak to us today about how our brains process information during a pandemic or crisis. Take it away.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for having me. And it's my honor to be here to present at this opportunity. And I just wanted to kind of say a few things. We'll be talking about how, in general terms, initially how the brain processes stress, any kind of stressful information, any kind of trauma, and not in a you look at in a neuropharmacological perspective or psychiatric perspective, but also in general terms how it affects. In the current situation with the pandemic we have regarding corona, and how it affects elderly patient population. And there's a lot more to cover, but I think the time is limited. We'll try to simply keep it simple and to the point. And the topics today we are going to cover how different people react to COVID-19 and stress that is coming from it. And the first slide is about the different ways that people react to COVID-19 and the stress that it places on the people. Basically, when you look at the information from the American Psychiatric Association's latest information, 48% of the people are anxious about themselves getting coronavirus. And then you have 40% of the Americans are also worried about dying from coronavirus. And then 62% of the Americans are anxious about their loved one, family member having coronavirus. So this is how people are looking at themselves, their loved ones, and not only getting a coronavirus, getting infected or being tested positive, but also dying from it. And that number is 40 close to 40%. So which is when you look at it, it's a significant number of people are worried about dying from it. And which is a stress-inducing thing in any person's life. And I think when you look at, generally speaking, when people are stressed out about different things, when you have any stressful situation, in this particular case, COVID-19, a car accident, or a loss of a family member, or any kind of traumatic event in anyone's life, you process information two ways. One is immediate reaction, which is kind of fight and flight reaction, and that leads to increased stress hormone level, and then it goes through emotional part of the brain that gives you immediate reaction response, and then you have a sensory part. You have a more later response when people think rationally, and then they come up with a better way of dealing with the solution, dealing with the problem, and by understanding the nature of the problem and the stress and dealing with it. So there is a first part is a more of an emotional response. The second part is more of a logical and methodical or calculated response to the stressful things. And initially, when you look at, and then in general terms, looking at the response of the people, you have to look at their age, you need to look at their educational level, their prior experience with the similar or traumatic events, and what kind of coping skills and strategies and resources they have to deal with these things. And I think it goes into this like a typical we use in the mental health biopsychosocial formulation. You look into genetic predisposition of the person, all the perpetuating factors, they can lead to this kind of stressful event, all the precipitating events, and all the protective factors that the people may have in their system, psychological system, social system, or microcosm they live in. And it's an interplay of all these things that brings a response to any kind of stressful situation. When you look at the stages of, the next slide is about the stages of processing COVID. So it's not even COVID, actually. It is any stressful event, loss of a family member, anything. People initially deny it. They feel like it's not true, it can't be happening. And this is just overblown, or this is just exaggerated, or it's not real. Basically, we live in a denial, and finally we accept it. Once we accept it, we start to take our anger out on other people or ourselves or objects. We can blame China for it. We can blame the government for it. We can blame ourselves for it. We can bring the people who potentially may have brought the virus to us, and we end up taking our anger out on those people. And then after that, we tend to kind of bargain, and we try to kind of find a way to deal with it. And then once we bargain, and the person who's infected with the coronavirus, or a loved one or family member with the infection, people finally accept it, and then they can go into like a depression, or depressed mode, or some kind of mode to finally they have accepted the reality of it, and then people can seek help or just not seek help, and they start to look at various ways of dealing with it. And sometimes people accept it and accept that this is it and I'm going to die from it, or accept that I have it and I need to work on it, and then they can go on to take some kind of medical interventions to deal with the things. And this is pretty much, these are the stages basically you had Elizabeth Ross, presented a long time ago. Basically, is the same thing for people who are dying. They go through the same thing. People go through any kind of sudden stress. We all go through these kind of things, and this is probably in a modified way the similar process that all the people who are infected with the COVID or people who have family members affected with the COVID are going through this thing. Now, so when you look at it, the question about does age play a role in how people react to pandemic, and I think it does make a big difference. Younger patient population, basically, when you look at COVID, there is a theory that a lot of people are saying that they are not infected or the outcome is different, and which is true that they can transmit the virus to other folks and can cause some problems, since there is information out there that they are not going to be affected by it, and therefore they will take less precautions, and they will not, since they don't see them getting affected by it, they will end up actually exposing their family members who are vulnerable, grandparents, parents who are medically compromised, they are already immunocompromised, and they basically can be the source of spreading this thing. And so this is how it's not affecting them directly that much, or there's a lack of insight or understanding, or being a young, you think you're going to live forever, so therefore you don't have to worry about this thing, and people take it that way. Middle-aged people, they also process the same information, similar information, differently. Their ages are between 45 to 54, and they feel like it will not have a significant impact on their life, so basically, it's another kind of in between version of the same thing, that they will have partial understanding and some complacency that they are not that vulnerable, therefore they are not going to be worried that much about the impact of this thing, but they are going to be somewhat better than younger patient population between the ages of 18 and 24. Then you have older consumers who are the most fearful of the spread and changing behaviors. And they're basically, when you look at the information, they are the most vulnerable, and they are the most scared and the nervous, anxious, because the media, everyone is saying this thing, that they are the one who are most likely to die from it. And therefore, they are the one who are most affected from this epidemic, physically, emotionally, and any other possible way. And the other thing is, when you look at it, information about does age, play a role in people's reaction to this pandemic, and it does not only how you receive information, how you communicate, and how you transfer this or convey this virus to other people, but also older patient population also have dementia, and the people with the dementia, different stages of dementia, different memory problems, can process this information differently. And I think that is another significant part of the problem, because people may not be able to understand because they have memory problem, and they may not understand the full extent of the problem, and they may forget all the instructions, all the basic instructions, like such as hand washing and taking all the proper precautions, or they may remember one part of it, not the other part of it. As a result of that, loss of memory, which is more prevalent in this patient population, can also have a huge impact on their physical vulnerability, and also emotional side of it. And then the other thing is, most of these folks are also living together, or living, especially people living in group homes, nursing homes. They're all kind of like all together, and they can expose each other to these things. And I think so. Memory loss have a big impact on how they react to this kind of epidemic or pandemic, and it plays a huge role in their life. So the next thing is we look at how another wave of COVID can affect the mental health of the elderly patient population. I think it's you have to look at two parts of it. One is the immediate physical impact. The second thing is chronic stress. Chronic stress can lead to depression. Chronic stress can lead to mood disorder, and which can also impact the person's ability to take care of themselves, ability to take care of their medications, take care of their hygiene, take care of relationship with each other. And I think so when you're living in a chronic under chronic stress, sometimes you start to have problem with the neurons. Neurons tend to not live longer when you are under chronic stress. Chronic stress can also cause some physical problems, GI problems, ulcers. You have your blood glucose can go up because of the stress hormones go up, and they will increase. So people who are diabetic, they can have fluctuating blood glucose level. People who have asthma, they can also have shortness of breath because it can give you some anxiety. So you have a whole host of things can happen, and dietary changes. And I think it's so when you have recurrence of the same thing, so it can have a significant impact on in the long term how the people are living. And not only that, you can also have the impact because people have lost their friends, their family members during the first wave, and now they are living with the grief and loss, and that they have not processed or not fully processed. They're worried about themselves, and there are some uncertainties about the future waves. So it's a combination of all these things can have a significant impact in their own immunity, in their physical response to the COVID-19 treatment, and other than the emotional response to it. And people can actually lead to use of different coping skills or the wrong coping skills, doing drugs or alcohol, using alcohol, or giving up and not taking care of their physical needs and emotional needs, and end up having some serious issues along those lines. So, so then you look at, I mean, being in a quarantine can also seriously impact mental health, leading to anger, confusion, and some symptoms of PTSD. And then I think I just wanted to kind of deviate a little bit from this slide and just say something. I think the term that we have, this physical, social distancing, is actually, I feel like it's not properly communicated. I think people need to have a physical distance, but not a social distance, because I think that you need to be socially close to the people who are vulnerable. It doesn't mean that you have to be physically in contact with them. I think using the technology, all the communication devices, everyone has cell phone, everyone has all the access to the Facebook, all kind of ways to communicate, interact. I think that should have been increased, because that would help people in a quarantine situation. That can be used to educate them and help them understand and deal with their fear and anxieties, and give them a realistic, to the point information that they can understand based on their intellectual ability, based on their memory, basically, and it can go from it can vary from person to person and family to family. But I think the loved ones, the family members, physicians, counselors, therapists who know their patient or family member very closely, they understand their abilities and capabilities, can give them very much up-to-date, to the point information, so that they can understand the reality, not be anxious, and then process that information, and based on that information take appropriate steps to keep themselves safe and protected, and manage themselves. I think by coining this term, the social distancing, actually, I think some people they stopped even talking and basically isolated the most vulnerable people. And sometimes that I think it was not properly done. That is my perspective. I think we just need to stress the point that keep a physical distance, but increase your social interaction with the people who are most vulnerable in a vulnerable time to help them increase their understanding of the problem and help them not get depressed and anxious and overwhelmed, because they will lead to further problem with the immunity and immune system. And if they are happy and if they are supported, I think they will have a better chance of fighting and dealing with this pandemic. Thank you very much. Now, we have some resources in the community. You can look at like our institution here, like University Behavioral Center, and we can, we are inpatient here. We offer inpatient detox, substance abuse, and rehab, and other services. I mean, they can be used in a acute setting for people who are really have gone to a point where they need inpatient treatment. But at the same time, before that, there are some other resources in the community. People can utilize those resources not to get to this point, and help all the people who are vulnerable or who are struggling, and they can use this information to improve their physical and emotional well-being during this stressful time. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Hafeed, for that very informative presentation. I want to remind everyone, wherever you're watching, whether it's on Facebook or YouTube, please use the comments section to submit any questions that you'd like to ask. So at this point, if there are any questions for Dr. Hafeed, please send them in. And by the way, if you're on YouTube, you do have to sign in. You got to log in before you can use that comment section to post a question. All right, so I'm not seeing any questions. Dr. Hafeed, thank you again. And we will move ahead to our next presentation. So at this time, we're going to be heading into our session number 2, called Protecting Elders from Fraud and Scams Online and Elsewhere. Our presenter today is Jennifer Peresie. She is the Assistant U.S. Attorney in the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Middle District of Florida. Jennifer is passionate about protecting senior citizens from fraud, serving as a voice for victims, and ensuring that justice prevails. Jennifer has been an Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Middle District of Florida in the Tampa Division since 2010. She is a member of the Economic Crime Section, where she focuses on prosecuting elder fraud cases. And since 2018, she has been the district's Elder Justice Coordinator. Welcome, Jennifer.
Good morning.
Hi.
So if we could go to the slide deck, and I want to thank you all for letting me talk to you this afternoon about fraud prevention with a focus on COVID-19 fraud and scams that we're seeing right now. Americans lose billions and billions to financial fraud every year. And it's estimated, so we're still on the first slide. Can we go back to the first slide? Okay, wonderful, thank you. It is estimated that every year over 13%, so more than 1 in 10 senior citizens are the victims of financial fraud. And this isn't just seniors losing $10 or $100. This is senior citizens losing their whole life savings. The average victim loses $120,000 to fraud. And that's the average. That means there's a lot that are a lot more. However, only 1 in 44 cases of financial abuse are reported. My job as Elder Justice Coordinator is to try to give outreach to you all and obviously try to avoid the fraud scams, but also to change the reporting. Can we go to the next slide? Thank you. So I want to start by telling you a little bit about my office, the U.S. Attorney's Office. We investigate and prosecute violations of federal criminal law. And one of our office priorities is to prosecute elder abuse and financial fraud. The Middle District of Florida is a massive district, basically the whole middle swath of the state, from Jacksonville in the north to Tampa to Orlando to Ocala and down to Fort Myers. Next slide, please. As I said, Americans lose billions of dollars to fraud every year. And as you can see here, everyone is a potential victim. Victims come from all age groups, all races, all nationalities. But older Americans are particularly vulnerable to fraud. Elder victims report victimization more frequently and often lose more money. And senior citizens with cognitive issues such as dementia tend to suffer the greatest economic loss. And one of the key factors that we've seen in all of the research is isolation. And so with isolation imposed by COVID-19, the fraudsters are being even more successful. So they're reaching people that are vulnerable and that are more likely to become victims. So I'm going to try to talk a little louder. I know it's a little bit hard to hear me. I'm sorry about the technical issues. So let's go to the next slide. So why do fraudsters, can we go to the next slide? Thank you. Why do fraudsters target senior citizens? Well, the short answer is because they have money, and there's a lot of them. Approximately 10,000 Americans turn 65 years old every day. There's a lot of senior citizens, and there's the perception that they have money saved up that they can spend. They're also more likely to be accessible. They still answer their phones. They still answer their door if someone knocks. And they're vulnerable in many cases. Some senior citizens may suffer from ailments that make them more vulnerable, such as memory issues. They're also, in many cases, isolated and maybe even lonely. So they'll talk to and engage with the fraudster when they call up or contact them by email. Next slide, please. So how does financial abuse occur? Basically, any way you can think of to talk to a person on the phone, computer, mail, TV, radio, or in person, the fraudsters use.
I'm not sure.
So let's talk about some of the most common fraud scams, and particularly COVID fraud. Can we get to the next slide? COVID fraud is big business. Fraudsters are really taking advantage of the circumstances. They're taking advantage of a captive, lonely, and vulnerable audience, and they're using scare tactics to threaten, harass, and frighten all people, but particularly the elderly, into parting with their money. In fact, one case that was particularly horrible involved two people who were impersonating Health and Human Services. They went to an elderly couple in Florida. They claimed that they had COVID-19 tests, and it was mandatory that this couple take the tests. They actually forced themselves into the elderly couple's home. They swabbed the individuals. They attempted to ask for money and claimed they were legit government officials. They weren't. They were fraudsters, and they were harassing these elderly people. So let's talk about some of the most common fraud scams online and elsewhere. And let's start with COVID-19 fraud. Next slide, please. We're seeing a lot of scams with individuals or businesses selling fake cures or fake tests for COVID-19, or fake or overpriced supplies. A lot of these fall under the umbrella of, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. We all know that there's no known cure for COVID and there's no vaccine yet. But that doesn't stop people from emailing, calling, or posting online claimed cures, and obviously charging a pretty penny. And some of these are pretty crazy. People advertising pesticides, people advertising things that can make someone very sick as cures or vaccines. The same thing with fake tests and fake supplies. We're seeing in the Middle District of Florida a lot of cases where people are selling fake N95 masks on eBay and elsewhere, or where they're price gouging and selling one mask for $50, for instance. This is an issue of you have to do your research. If it seems too good to be true, it probably is. Next slide, please. So the next type of fraud that we're seeing a lot of, and we always see a lot of, but particularly with COVID-19, is a scammer who claims to be with a government agency, but it's actually a person behind a computer in a boiler room somewhere abroad. And that scammer threatens. Sorry, 1 second. Sorry about that. That scammer threatens the victim with arrests or a fine, or asks for personal identifying information, including bank account information, and then often asks for payment via wire or gift cards, and keeps the victim on the phone until the transaction is complete. Pre-COVID, the most common thing we were seeing was people calling and saying, I'm from the IRS and you owe back taxes, or I'm from the marshals, we have a warrant out for your arrest. Well, we all know that if the law enforcement has a warrant, they don't call on the phone. If the IRS wants taxes, they don't call you. They either come, or in the case of the IRS, they send a letter. With COVID-19, there's a lot of fraudsters who are impersonating Medicare, Health and Human Services, and Social Security Administration, and claiming that someone's benefits are being suspended. They're also claiming that they have COVID-19 tests. Be suspicious. And if someone asks you about this type of outreach, tell them to be suspicious. If you get a call from someone purporting to be from a government agency and don't recognize who's on the phone, contact the agency. But unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of people, and particularly seniors, believing that just because someone says on that phone, I'm from the government, that they really are from the government. Next slide, please. The next fraud that we're seeing a lot of, and particularly during COVID-19, is romance fraud. And this is where a scammer meets someone online, establishes a friendship or even a romantic relationship with a person, and then uses that trust to trick the victim into sending money. This is particularly troubling during COVID-19 because all people, and especially seniors, are isolated. So people that aren't ordinarily the type that would have a lot of conversations online before talking to someone have to, by virtue of the circumstances. Next slide. And I have this slide here just to show sort of how it works graphically. Online, he's tall, dark, and handsome, rich, and looking for love. In the reality, he looks more like Shrek. These schemes all follow the same basic plan. The fraudster has an email, for example, maybe I'm a widow looking for love. Most people don't respond, but a few, the vulnerable few, do. And the fraudster will become their pen pal for months, gain trust, and then ask for money. For legitimate reasons that you would send money to someone. They're in the hospital, they are having issues getting luggage, now they have issues needing treatment for COVID-19. But these aren't true reasons, and these aren't true friends or romantic relationships. The bottom line is that seniors are losing, and others are losing their money because they're giving it to someone they haven't met in person. And it's hard because right now we can't meet people in person. But there's fraudsters who are taking advantage of this, and they're particularly taking advantage of this during COVID-19. So then the last type of fraud I want to talk about is tech support fraud. This is where a scammer claims to be a computer technician, often associated with Microsoft or another well-known company or its products. And they call individuals and say that viruses or other malware have been detected on the consumer's computers. And sometimes they'll call, sometimes they'll email, sometimes there'll be a pop-up that comes on your computer screen, because the fraudsters can buy advertisements just like any other company. And then that scammer charges for unnecessary software services like virus removal. And they get access to the victim's computer. And when they do that, they steal personal information such as bank accounts. We're seeing a ton of this in the Middle District of Florida. And the new flavor of this is COVID-19 fraud, is the fraudsters actually calling and telling senior citizens, your computer has COVID-19. Now, it might not make a lot of sense from the outset, but you can understand how someone who's scared, who's vulnerable, who's already stressed out about COVID-19 falls for a scam that says your computer has it too. Next slide. So essentially, the way to avoid becoming a victim of tech support scam or any of the other types of scams I talked about is to do your research. If someone claims to be from a computer company or from the government or from anywhere else without you contacting the company first, it's a scam. If someone says the computer has a virus or malware through a pop-up or on a phone call, it's a scam. If someone you don't know wants access to your computer or your PII, it's a scam. So next slide. So tips for avoiding fraud. Now, first off, this is usually the point in the presentation where I'm giving this live, where I can see and I look out to the audience, and I'm sure there's people out there virtually thinking, I'm not vulnerable. I'm not going to fall for this. I do my research. I know what I'm doing. If you think you're not vulnerable, that's awesome. But help others. We need to have a neighborhood watch for fraud. If you were in your neighborhood and you saw a house on fire, you wouldn't hesitate. You'd call 911 or you'd call the fire department. We need to do the same thing for fraud. If a friend, if a neighbor, a colleague, a client tells you about something that sounds like one of these scams or sounds like anything else that's too good to be true, educate them. Tell them, hey, maybe we should think about whether this is a fraud before you send any more money. Look out for others. In your own life and in encouraging others, be suspicious. Do your research. And again, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. But the fraudsters are relying on people being scared, people being vulnerable, and people not doing that research. Next slide, please. I have up here on this slide 2 resources that I really encourage you all to use. The first is a national hotline, and you can either call in or you can go online. It's a long link, but you can find it right from www.justice.gov, which is the DOJ website. If there's a fraud or scam that you know of or that targets you relating to coronavirus, let law enforcement know about it. Because if you tell us, then we can investigate and we can ultimately prosecute. So that number and that website is for specific fraud or scams related to the coronavirus. At the bottom is the Internet Crime Complaint Center, and it's a much shorter, easier to remember address, www.ic3.gov. And using this, you can report any type of internet fraud, tech support fraud, romance fraud, any other fraud scheme that you encounter. Be suspicious, be cautious, don't become a victim, and don't let others become victims. I appreciate you letting me take your time to tell you about fraud prevention and about all of these scams that we're seeing during COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. We appreciate you joining us today, and thank you for the work that you do within the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Middle District of Florida. A quick reminder for our attendees, we are going to tell you at the end how to get today's presentations, so please hang tight for that. Now, does anybody have any questions for Jennifer? Please use your comment section. Make sure that you're signed in at Facebook as well as YouTube, and you'll be able to use that comment section to submit any questions at all.
Ingrid, we do have some questions for Jennifer.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks, Patty.
Linda asks, do you suggest a power of attorney where a person can be trusted for an elderly person?
And that's a hard question, but let me do my best to answer it. It's a hard question because it's always a question of when does someone get to the point where they need someone other than themselves to look out for. Certainly, if someone thinks they're at that point, or if you as a family think someone is at that point, it's probably a good idea. And you can have a power of attorney that doesn't take over you as the senior citizen's responsibilities, but works with the senior citizen. So it's not an either or. The danger, of course, is not having that power of attorney and then the person gets too far down the road where they can't even agree to a power of attorney, but they also don't have the ability to make decisions for themselves.
Okay, another question, I think it was toward the beginning of your presentation. It says, can you share the source of the figure of the average loss of 120,000?
I will have to get back to you on that,
okay,
and I can send that to you.
Perfect.
And that's obviously, you saw that there was the 1,100 for all fraud. So that's for these particular fraud schemes where someone's doing romance fraud or something of the sort.
Carmen wants to know, are fraudsters caught often and are they severely prosecuted?
Well, not as often as we'd like them to be. And particularly because so much of this fraud is abroad, and in some instances in countries that don't think it should be prosecuted. But where there are people in the United States or people in countries that we can extradite them from, we can prosecute. In fact, we're even working with India and Nigeria, who historically we haven't been able to charge a lot of people there, but we're even working to charge cases there. We have a transnational elder fraud strike force. The U.S. Attorney's Office, federal law enforcement, state law enforcement, local law enforcement, all working together to prosecute individuals in the United States and abroad.
That's great. The next question is, again from Carmen, a follow-up question is, what do the victims have to do other than report the fraud and ID the perp?
And in many cases, they can't ID the perp. So I think some of the reason that people aren't reporting it is they have no idea. They thought they were talking to tall, dark, and handsome, and obviously weren't. So all the victim has to do is tell us what they know, and then we can try to do the legwork from that. Now, certainly, if a case goes to trial, there might be a need for a victim to testify, but that doesn't happen that often. More often, the victim provides the information that allows us to go down the trail of identifying the perpetrator.
And I see your last question is there, so this is a good one, is there some type of volunteer organization that performs personal senior check-ins, quotes, for those most vulnerable?
No, but I'd love to see someone develop one. I know there's a Seniors Against Crime that is helpful when people start to feel like they have fallen for a crime, that they can talk to Seniors Against Crime before they give more money and say, what do you think about this?
Right.
Otherwise, that's why I say we really need to make this sort of more like a neighborhood watch and
Right.
look out for people.
Mm-hmm.
And Ingrid, you could tell people about AARP Fraud Watch Network.
That's right. So yeah, we're going to have more resources at the end, and also our community connections and friendly voices, where we're just calling for a friendly chat, not exactly what Jennifer was talking about or the questioner, but certainly some great resources to share. And I want to just remind all of our attendees, you don't have to wait for the Q&A after the presenters. If you think of a question at any point along the way, go ahead and put it in comments while you're thinking of it, and we'll address them when we get to the next Q&A. Okay, so now we're going to move on to our third session of today. This session is called National and State Policy Efforts to Stop Elder Abuse. Our presenters are my colleagues Diana, Noel, and Zayne Smith. Diana is a senior legislative representative in the Government Affairs, State Advocacy, and Strategy Integration team at AARP National Office in Washington, D.C. Diana is has been with the department since she joined AARP in 2011. She has served as an issue expert primarily in the area of elder abuse, financial exploitation, adult guardianship, powers of attorney, and other probate-related issues. She provides strategic advocacy advice, presentations, volunteer training, and technical assistance to AARP's 53 state offices to further their engagements in state-level legislation, judicial, and regulatory advocacy efforts. Presenting with Diana today is Zayne Smith. Zayne is an Associate State Director for Advocacy at AARP, Florida. She works out of our St. Pete office, which is also our main state office. Zayne is an experienced policy advocate with roots in Texas and policy experience at the state and national level. Zayne received her law degree from Thomas Good Jones School of Law in Montgomery and bachelor's degree in history from the University of West Alabama. She is the lead on our state office work on utilities, health, veterans affairs, transportation, and budget items. Thank you, ladies, for being with us, and take it away.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to start sharing the screen. This is Diana. Okay. Okay, can you guys see the PowerPoint pretty good? Okay, can you hear me? That's the good question. I'm going to just keep going. So this is Diana Noel, and I am with AARP's, as Ingrid said, I'm with AARP in our national office. I'm in government affairs, and I want to talk to you guys a little bit. I'm going to bring it out a little bit to kind of the bird's eye view of what we are seeing across the country as far as efforts to prevent and stop elder abuse, and more on using the advocacy lens, and also other AARP efforts with education and research, some of the things that we're doing there. So just to give you a sense of what we're seeing across the country and what's common across all states. So the one thing that every state is really working with and working on is really right now, obviously, the pandemic. So COVID is really bringing some interesting issues to the spotlight, like our previous speakers had identified issues with isolation. You know, how do you respond to and investigate reports of abuse, and when you have to probably go into a home to do some investigation. So COVID has actually really, states are really looking at how they investigate and how they can do that. And they've made a lot of adjustments and really using technology to increase how investigations can happen for elder abuse cases. So the thing about this issue, since I am a policy wonk, I just want to let you know, well, how does this play out politically? Typically, it's a bipartisan issue. This is an issue that everybody can really agree on. Elder abuse is bad. How do you stop it? But the difficult thing is how to, there's no one size fits all solution. So that means that every branch of government really have to work together, because there are executive functions that could help combat abuse, as well as legislative and judicial. So it's important that all pieces of government really work together to combat abuse of seniors. The other thing that's interesting about this issue is that you really don't hear about it or see it in the newspapers or see in these stories unless there's a crisis or really bad tragedy that happened. That's when it gets the attention. That's when people are interested in learning more. But with events like this, we can actually get the word out and say, hey, we know that there's this is an issue and we want to address it. How can we address it? The other thing about it is that it's really broad. So there are so many different ways, as Jennifer talked about and Dr. Aziz discussed, there are so many different ways of an entry point really to really, if you're that person that wants to go into that unfortunate way of really targeting someone, there are so many different ways to do it now, and technology has kind of enhanced that as well. The issue, because of that, has so many broad, it's very broad, it has many tentacles. So what I mean by that is that where you may have a physical, a person who had some physical abuse that happened, a perpetrator may then steal their money or have access to their bank account, and then that has health implications. So it's very, very broad with many, many tentacles, which is why it's that much more important for every branch of government and multiple professions to communicate on solutions. The other thing that's interesting, and that's something that we've been really looking into across the country, is that there is really state definitions about what defines abuse and who's covered under criminal sanctions and civil sanctions. The definitions vary across the country. Some states, when looking at elder abuse statutes, they define an elder or and by age, and some just do not define it as age, but rather as vulnerability or age and vulnerability. So the definitions vary, which could also make it difficult to track data, which is another issue that has come up, is that because there are so many different definitions, it's hard to say, well, which state has how many forms of abuse, and what do they look like, and what are their age groups, because the definitions vary in statute. The other thing that states are really struggling with across the board is just some of the overlapping issues of other issues that may come into play with elder abuse. Like, the biggest thing right now is there's often confusion between, well, what's fraud and what's elder abuse. So those issues tend to overlap and intersect, as well as other issues like guardianship abuse, or someone brought up power of attorney. So all of those issues kind of intersect, and you have to really understand how they intersect and what they mean, and because that determines who responds and who can investigate as well. The other thing that we often see is that there's oftentimes a disconnect between the frontline staff and people like who do intake, and also policymakers, and vice versa. So you need both. You want to make sure that you have folks who know how to really get good policy through, but you also need to make sure that the frontline staff and folks who do the day-to-day processing and assistance of victims, that they also have a seat at the table and can talk to the people and explain how they do their jobs and what works, what needs to, what could be tweaked a little bit, what are some challenges. So before tinkering and playing with policy, you really want to make sure that everyone talks to each other and work together. So what's happening? Overall, to be honest, states across the board are really doing a good job of really looking at the issue and making it, and really putting some teeth behind reform efforts. What we're seeing across the country, there's a lot more collaboration. There are a lot more task forces and multidisciplinary teams that have been created and developed in states, and they are working together because there's no one profession that's going to fix and everything that's related to elder abuse. You're going to need multidisciplinary teams. Like, you're going to need your doctors, you're going to need your attorneys, you need law enforcement, adult protective services, courts. You want to have a lot of different voices that look at this from different perspectives, so that you can really identify what's working in a state, what's not working as well as they thought it should, and also how to make sure that web pages are kind of talking to each other, because there's a lot of information out there, and a lot of state information on State Department web pages, but sometimes they don't connect. Or you may have this one awesome thing that's going on in one department that may not be connected to the rest of the state. So these teams have been very good in really identifying and showcasing some of the resources that are available as well. Another thing that we're seeing across the country is that financial institutions are really stepping up to help prevent financial exploitation. They are really looking into where they can, like, trainings to spot abuse or suspected exploitation. They can spot trends. You've probably seen on your phones where you might get an alert saying, hey, did you spend $200 at the Publix in another state? And that's like, no. So you'll see that financial institutions are really kicking up their efforts to help prevent elder abuse as well. Individuals and their families are speaking up a little bit more too. One of the barriers with elder abuse is that sometimes the victims don't feel comfortable, or they're embarrassed and they don't want to share their story. So the more we talk about it, the more we normalize it, the more we make people feel comfortable and let them know that, hey, it's not just you. It's okay. This happened. Then we'll get to have those first accounts, and then that'll also help with catching the bad guys as well. So I think because of technology and family members are actually spread out a little bit more, they're connecting in different ways and also sharing and telling their stories as well too. So education, outreach, and use of social media and other technologies really have really taken they just skyrocketed with elder abuse prevention. There's a lot more forums like this that are happening. We have World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. There are a lot of efforts going on around that. So there's a big, huge push for educating the public, and another push for also educating fiduciaries, and like, what's really your role and responsibility? If you are an agent under power of attorney, what does that mean? What are you allowed to do? What are you not allowed to do? What do you need to ask before you do? So those are the kinds of things that are really increasing. Also, state courts are really stepping up as well and they're working on taking a more active role with increase in monitoring with adult guardianship, oversight reforms there, and help really coordinate with the community a lot better to help prevent abuse and exploitation there. And then also with powers of attorney, there's a little more uniformity with forms, with understandings of the roles of the individual signing the documents. That is also something that we're seeing as far as reform trends. Now, AARP, we really have a multi-pronged effort really on combating abuse, elder abuse. And one of the things, obviously, we have federal and state advocacy. As Ingrid shared, we have a state office in every state in DC, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. So we do have, if you are, I know this is a AARP Florida sponsored event, but I'm not sure where everyone is watching from. So if you are not in Florida and in another state, then you have an AARP office. So really reach out and check and see what they are working on as far as advocacy efforts and what's going on in your state around elder abuse prevention. We also have our Fraud Watch network that Ingrid had mentioned earlier. Fraud Watch network, and I'll have the later on after Zayne speak, you'll see we have some contact information. There's a phone number, there's a podcast, there's a website, there's a tracker on what are the frauds out there. There's a lot of education and support. They do webinars. So just to get information and education out to people about what are the current frauds and supports out there for victims as well. Lastly, we have what's called an Bank Safe. So this is a program with AARP where there's a training that financial institutions can sign up for, so that to really show how to even spot abuse and particularly financial exploitation. How do you even know as a bank teller that what's a legitimate transaction and what looks a little fishy that you might want to question? And now turn it over to Zayne so she can give you just a sense of what AARP Florida is up to. Zayne?
All right. Thank you, Diana. And for everyone out there, I'm going to set the table for what Florida is going through or looks like right now in terms of addressing elder abuse, whether it be financial, physical, or otherwise. I am happy to say, though, that many of the reforms that Diana mentioned on the national level have taken place in Florida already. I like to think of Florida as the leader in addressing some of these issues as it relates to seniors. And that might obviously be because of the demographics of Florida. As you can see on that slide right now, AARP Florida has about 2.9 million members with more than 3,000 volunteers. And as mentioned before, we have offices in Doral, St. Petersburg, and Tallahassee. One of the things that we do here in Florida is a multi-pronged approach at addressing some of these issues. So education and outreach are a crucial part of the work that we do. We hold community events and try to educate not just our AARP members, but other professional organizations, students at universities, and general community groups in the public. We've mentioned the Fraud Watch Network, and then another piece that we do to provide education and outreach is through voter engagement. AARP is a nonpartisan organization. We don't endorse any candidate, any political party. We do not make donations to any political party or candidate. But what we do is put the issues of the 50 plus in front of people who are running for public office, whether it be at the local, state, or national level. We've even had a big push to get in front of presidential candidates and our current president. Some of the biggest issues our seniors are facing across the country. And then finally, it goes without being said that advocacy is really where we push in Tallahassee and in Washington, D.C. to implement some of these reforms or raise issues that we're seeing or that we're hearing from the community, from professionals, and from the direct care organizations that are out there on the front lines. One of the ways in which we like to keep you updated here in Florida about different activities and accomplishments that happen during the legislative session is through our annual state legislative voting record. It's something that we publish and can provide hard copies, and we also have it online. And what we do with our voting record is we let the public know what issues we thought were the most prominent, the issues we fought hard for, and how the legislators voted on those records. We don't grade legislators. We don't assign them any type of favorability percentage in terms of our view on an issue. We strictly let the public know how the legislators voted on the various issues we chose to address. So next slide. All right, there's a lot on this slide, and I don't want to go through it in detail, but I do want to make note that these are 3 examples of legislation that AARP and many others supported here in Florida that address and try to get at the heart of elder abuse in various ways. Once again, this is just 3 of many different reforms that have passed within the past 5 to 6 years. The first one, which is exploitation of a vulnerable adult, was a major victory that really was created to address when somebody has a financial drain occurring, when there's somebody, a fraudster, or somebody who is taking financial advantage of a vulnerable adult. This allowed for immediate action to take place to stop the draining of someone's assets and allow the courts and investigators to sort out what exactly is going on. I think as many of you on this presentation may know, when you lose money through fraud, you don't get it back. And one of the biggest issues, and I think Jennifer in her presentation got to the heart of it, is we're talking about assets that were accrued over a lifetime, somebody's life savings. And when that is gone, it's gone. So this legislation that passed in 2018 really provided a mechanism to stop that drain of finances and let people figure out what was going on. Another bill that passed actually this year and that was just signed by Governor DeSantis was the Elder Abuse Fatality Review Teams. While this seems like a no-brainer, this is an issue that took 5 years to get through the Florida legislative session. This was something we were on the front lines with, worked with both parties, worked with legislative leaders in both chambers, and really wanted to see this come to fruition because right now, Florida really lacks any type of actual data or evidence related to elder abuse deaths. And so what this legislation will do is create review boards in various judicial circuits to review incidents of potential elder abuse. So this will not allow for any criminal or civil charges to come forth, but what we're doing with this legislation is creating the teams that will review, find out where there is a problem, what the problem is, and then make policy recommendations to the legislature to address where Florida is falling short right now on potential elder abuse cases that result in a death. Finally, like Diana mentioned, elder abuse is multi-pronged and guardianship is a big issue. Anybody that was here in Florida that is in that circle dealing with guardianship knew of what happened in Orlando last year. And so the guardianship bill that you see listed here is awaiting Governor DeSantis's approval. It has been presented to him. We have every reason to believe he'll be signing it, but this bill was a direct result of an issue where a guardian was signing do not resuscitate orders to the ward. The people were passing away. It was not the wish of the family or the ward in many cases. So now the new law will require that a court determine whether or not a DNR is in fact necessary. It also addresses the conflict of interest that some guardians may have when it comes to getting guardianship over a ward. In the case in Orlando, we saw that there were some financial incentives and a kickback scheme between the professional guardian and some of the healthcare professionals that was taking place. So this legislation and now new law will actually prevent or try to seek out where there might be a conflict of interest and make the due process rights for a potential ward and their family a little bit easier to ascertain. Overall, as it relates to guardianship in Florida, this has been an ongoing issue since 2014. We've had some legislative champions on both sides of the aisle. I can't stress strong enough that this is truly a bipartisan issue. We've had Republicans and Democrats, both big name and small and everything in between, come to the table wanting to address elder abuse in Florida. So it's something that we will continue to see reforms in Tallahassee. It's something that, we will no doubt be a leader in the country on other issues as they arise, especially related to COVID or any other type of pandemic. So AARP is on the front lines in Tallahassee, and it's something that it takes a community to really raise this issue and get in front of the legislators. So next slide. So what can you do to combat elder abuse? We've had a lot of talking today about what people are doing, what organizations are doing, kind of the psychology behind people right now. But there are some things you can do immediately. And the first and foremost is to be proactive. And I always tell people education is key. Until you're aware of the issue or to know how to address the issue or identify the issue, we're not going to be as helpful as we have the potential to be. So educate yourselves, your family members, your neighbors, know what your state, so if you're not in Florida, know what your state laws are related to elder abuse or where you go to report it. But once you're proactive and you educate yourself, that's when you can shift to becoming an advocate, right? Know your neighbors, know family members, know their mental condition or what documents exist. We had a great question about the power of attorney. And like Jennifer said, that is a tricky situation, and it's something that should definitely be addressed in a broader estate planning package. But it's something that as an advocate for somebody that you care about or that you know what they're signing, know what they're getting involved in. If somebody, a fraudster, is coming to them with the potential to save the world in a short time, raise your voice. Obviously, the last thing is be kind. I think Diana said it best. A lot of people who are victims of whether it be fraud, abuse, neglect, financial exploitation, they're embarrassed and they're afraid to come forward. They're afraid to talk about it. Nobody likes to be felt like they were tricked. And so being kind, having the conversations, being a friendly ear goes a long way for those people who are the victims in these scenarios. So that's what you can do right now, is to educate yourself, to be proactive, go advocate and be aware, and then just be kind. It goes a long way. So finally, the slide that we have up here are some of the resources that AARP has available right now. I know we are inundated right now with coronavirus information, but AARP has made an effort to create a coronavirus webpage that specifically deals with issues related to the 50 plus. We're trying to eliminate some of the, overburdensome type of information to drill down to the heart of what the 50 plus. So we encourage you to go check out our coronavirus page. AARP Florida, our website is full of all sorts of information related to advocacy, laws, things happening in your community, and virtual engagements that we're going to be doing for the rest of the year. So we really encourage you to go check out our webpage. And as you can see, there's some other resources available. The other one I'll highlight really is the Fraud Watch Network. I mean, that's kind of the theme of the day, is fraudsters and people being taken advantage of. The Fraud Watch Network is open and available to anyone. You do not have to be an AARP member to go check out what types of fraud are in your community or to report types of fraud. We work closely with the Attorney General's office here in Florida. So any reports we receive, we're getting to the proper authorities as well. So I really encourage you to go to the Fraud Watch Network webpage or the helpline to report any type of suspected fraud. Thank you.
Thank you. And please, share that information with your loved ones in other states too. All of this information is readily available on our website. And the interesting thing is when Jennifer mentioned that that example of the COVID testing scams, check out the Perfect Scam podcast. There was an episode recently where a woman shared her story about being scammed by someone, and a whole group. They had a whole setup in a parking lot, a church parking lot at that, where they were giving out free tests. So it's a very interesting and informative episode of that podcast. But that's it. Do we have any questions?
We do have just a couple questions. One is from Nancy. With COVID, many of the elderly may prefer to vote by mail. In Florida, this has been in place for some time. Is there fraud regarding renewal of requests for mail-in ballots?
I can go ahead and address that. So I don't know if there's any confirmed fraud at this moment, but what I can say is there is 2018 new website through the Florida Department of Elections where you can actually go check your voter registration status. If you've requested a mail-in ballot, you can actually track it to see if it was delivered to your home Once you mail it back, you can track it to make sure it was received by the supervisor of elections in your voting district and to see if it was accepted. So it's not just a matter of they receive it in the mail, but then they have to match your signature to the signature they have on file for you. So if there's an issue, once they've received it, they will be notifying you saying you have a no match. I think for those people that don't have internet access or are unable to navigate the internet to find some of this, because it can be tricky, every county in the state of Florida has a supervisors of election office. And so I would encourage you to call. They have a 1-800 number. So if your voting district is Orange County, you'll call the Orange County Supervisor of Election or Manatee County Supervisor of Election. We don't have a one-size-fits-all phone number because it's unique to each Supervisor of Elections office. So I would encourage you, if you suspect there is fraud or something going on with your vote by mail request and or return, to call your Supervisor of Election, and they will help you figure out whatever's going on.
Valerie has I think it's more of a comment and a great user tip is for scams, cons, frauds, you can refer Florida seniors to the Senior Legal Helpline at 888-895-7893 for free telephonic legal advice from attorneys. So that's a great resource there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Ingrid, we can make sure that we add that to our list of resources when we email everybody at the end.
Yes.
And
then
I
think that also that's a good point. And that also piggybacks on my point about making sure that you get involved with multidisciplinary teams, because sometimes there's so much information out there and a lot of good information out there. And trust me, I see it across the country, but people put a lot of effort into a lot of good work. And sometimes we end up talking amongst ourselves and not sharing the information or knowing how to get the information out to people who really need it. So that's a perfect example of, okay, there's a resource in Florida, let's get it out. And let's see how we can connect that with other good information out there too. So thank you.
I'm seeing this comment from an Alice Marie. I think it was from Jennifer, but it could easily be into your presentation as well, where she gave a great suggestion where it says Meal on Wheel volunteers could easily be trained and already have a relationship with deliveries just to help educate people on scams. So just an idea that came quickly to mind. That's a great idea. What do you think?
I think that's honestly, I think that that's a great idea too. And you know what, it just reminded me of, I think it was Texas. There was an event that our state office was doing, and they got a call from the librarians. And they said, hey, you know, if you can give us some of your resources on the Fraud Watch Network, we'd love to share it in the libraries, because, you know, a lot of people come into the library to access the computers. So this will be a perfect way to share information there. So you'd be surprised who your community partners are. And I just honestly, I think that everyone's a community partner. So get the information out there.
I would think postal carriers would be another one as well. And we need to educate the people at the Western Union who are anyway, people are sending for the Grand Character. But anyway,
multidisciplinary. There's
no wrong answer.
And and I think the last one is Alice Marie follow up. I guess it's around your election. I go directly to the voting supervisor's office and verify it in their systems. I take no chances with voting and caught errors in several years in Marion County. Way to go, Alice Marie.
And I'll second that. And the only plug I'll say about elections is that act sooner rather than later this year. Obviously, because of COVID, a lot of people are concerned about safety going to the polls. There are a lot of ongoing litigation and requests by voting rights groups in Florida right now that may change some of the dates, may extend some of the early voting. But my words of wisdom would be for both our primary and our general election, take care of it sooner rather than later. Don't wait to the last minute, because there is the real threat that there could be some backlogs. There could be long days of waiting in lines to vote if you try to go in person. If you're going to do vote by mail, know your deadlines, because there are deadlines that you have to request your ballot and for the supervisor of election to send it in. So just act sooner rather than later is my words of wisdom as it relates to voting this year.
Okay.
I guess we
well,
could say that also too, as regarding reporting suspected abuse as well too.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Diana. Thank you, Zayne. You both exhibit tremendous dedication to your work. I'm very proud to call you colleagues. They do fantastic work. So thank you again. And we did get a question. Before I hand it back to Wendy on the reminder about the CEUs, I want to remind everyone that the presentations will be made available. You're going to receive instructions in an email after today's event. It will contain a post-event survey. We want to hear your thoughts. Tell us how we did. We're trying new platforms and trying new things at AARP. So we hope that you'll give us your feedback. So let us know where we can improve. And so now I'll hand it over to Wendy. Please remind everybody about CEUs.
Hi guys, it's Wendy again. I just wanted to give you one more reminder for the CEs. You're going to fill out a survey and make sure to put your CEU information. Please don't forget to put the letters before your numbers. For instance, MH for mental health or social work, so we know which board to put them on. If you have any problems or any questions or I can help with anything, my email is on the screen, I believe showing right now with Ingrid. It's Wendy, WINDY.McCarty, MCCARTY @UHSINC.com. And again, I want to thank you for having us today. It's been a pleasure. If you have any need for inpatient detox, substance use rehab, or mental health care, please keep us in mind. And thanks again. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Wendy. Thank you. So I wanted to leave you guys with a couple reminders. First of all, just in case we had other folks joining us from outside the state, I wanted to just share with you a national number because as we've heard today, elder abuse is important, it's chronic, it's critical, and we are all part of the community that can take responsibility for when we see it, that we can report it. And any form of abuse should be reported. So whether you're a practitioner, a service provider, a loved one, of course, a friend or a neighbor, go ahead and report what you can. This website and toll-free number that's on your screen now, you will be able to find a state-by-state list of places to report. And so we wanted to share that with you. And so now we have come to the end of our presentation. We thank you so much for joining us today. If you're feeling lonely, I did promise to share so you here, it is toll free 888-281-0145. Again, that's 888-281-0145. And you can go online if you prefer. We have online request forms, English and Spanish. Website is aarpcommunityconnections.org. Thank you again. This concludes our program. Have a great day.